I am the Lord of Deadside, Shadowborn at the confluence of worlds to walk between. Lifeside is without the meaning that my partly living possesses here in Deadside, where the darkness is manifest at the edges of reason. As a god, I step forth upon the writhing, separating surface of the Deadside serpent. What sleep is here? What dreams there are in the unctuous coilings of the snake's mortal shuffling. Weapon in my hand, the arcing death blow at the end of all things. The horror, I embrace it.
I genuinely didn't set out to make a video about this game when I first purchased it. I noticed it got remastered on Steam and I'd played it a long time ago, so I figured I'd buy it and just play through it on a rainy day. But when I finally did, it was one of those games where I just found myself continuously sitting back in my chair and saying, this is an amazing game. But explaining why I liked it so much wound up being really tricky actually. Not because I'm conflicted about it, but because the game itself has so much to offer, it's tough to really squeeze it into a few talking points. So, since this channel doesn't really have much of a theme anyways, we're going to talk about Shadowman, the classic horror-themed Metroidvania, platformer, collectathon, survival third-person shooter that never really got the time of day. Our focus will primarily be on the game itself, but we are playing the remaster here today, and I'll say that if you're one of those people who views remasters as lazy or greedy, this is probably the game I would use to change your mind. The controls have been greatly improved, it runs smoothly on newer operating systems, the updated textures are faithful to the original vision, and there's been a ton of new content added, from completely new levels, new enemies, new secrets, content that was censored depending on your platform has been re-added. It even has a remastered soundtrack from the original composer. I really can't praise Nightdive Studios enough for the love and care that they put into this game. I mean, the new lighting engine alone makes every area in the game look incredible. I won't dwell on the remaster's quality here because we're going to be praising it throughout the video when it's appropriate, but it goes without saying that if anything about this video piques your interest, the remastered version on Steam is without a doubt the definitive version of the game and the one that you should pick up. I really respect the efforts that they and other studios have put into making sure that the successes of older games can continue to be enjoyed by new audiences, and that's really why I sat down to make this too. There's lessons to be learned from the way that Shadowman was made. It overcomes issues that are very common in games today, while still being really fun to play despite its age. You play as Michael Ura, a man who had the Mask of Shadows sewn into his ribcage by Nettie, a 300-year-old voodoo priestess that has effectively enslaved him and uses him to fight evil. He made peace with his fate before this game and mentions it during the opening cutscenes, but if it feels like you're leaping over a lot of backstory, you are. It has very little impact on this game in particular though, so don't worry too much about it. In the opening cutscene, you learn that Legion is going around gathering up serial killers from around the world in different time periods to construct a cathedral of pain in the afterlife so that they can gather up what are called Dark Souls. And no, I don't have any jokes made for that. So that they can use the Dark Souls to create an immortal, unstoppable army to take over the world from beyond the grave.
For we are many.
Amen to that.
Nettie learns of this coming apocalypse in a dream and tasks you as the Shadowman to go into Darkside, the land of the dead, to gather up the Dark Souls before Legion can get to them. Using the teddy bear of your dead brother as the link between worlds, you're off on your way. It's a lot to soak in at first, but it's handled very well actually. And really, once you scrape away all the fluff, it's a pretty standard and Ancient Evil Has Awoken setup. The particulars are going to be fleshed out as you go through the game, but not before a charming conversation with your old friend Jaunty, the Irish undead snake who guards the gates to Deadside.
Hello there, Michael. How's that treating you?
Jaunty, kindly refer to me as Shadowman. Michael Leroy has no place here in Deadside.
Whatever, Mick. It's good to see you again. Seems like simply ages since I last set me eyes on your happy, smiling mug.
Open the gates, Jaunty.
Places to go, people to see, eh, Michael?
Just open the gates, Jaunty.
Did I ever tell you about the time me and Attila the Hun were playing skittles with the guillotine heads of the French aristocracy?
Jaunty.
All right, keep your bloody hair on. Which, looking at your shining bonds, may prove to be rather difficult. Open sesame!
If you couldn't tell from the first few cutscenes, this game is a very different tone compared to many horror-themed games you're probably used to. I would compare it to a game like Carnival or House of the Dead, that old school, slasher-like, horror-for-fun vibe that you got from a lot of media in the 80s and 90s. A style of horror I'll say that I love and I think is really underutilized. Don't get me wrong though, I love horror games with a focus on fear and the dread. The Silent Hill series, for example, is a bunch of masterpieces, honestly. And I've played more horror games than I can count. but it does get a little exhausting with every single game trying to be this over-the-top, oozing with fear nonsense, especially after the success of Amnesia. Now every game has a powerless protagonist, and every monster encounter boils down to find the nearest closet, press the hide button, and wait 5 minutes. Shadowman, by contrast, is a breath of fresh air with its attitude of, yes, you're in hell, but you do have ammo. It's one of the major things I can put my finger on and say that this is why I love this game. That setting, that arcade-style gameplay, I love it. It never forgets that it's a video game. And that's not to say that it isn't dark either. It's absolutely an oppressive game, and horror is very much at the forefront. The apartment complex, especially in New York, in particular for nearly everyone who played the game, has some genuine tension and fear built into it. It's also where a lot of the censored content has been re-added, so if you do play this game, this level has a lot of genuinely scary moments for you. Just take my word for it, I'm not going to spoil it. But right alongside all of that is this really lighthearted fun as well. Jaunty and Nettie, who you can talk to throughout the game for help if you get lost, are always worth talking to. Their dialogue is great, and Jaunty's hilarious. The game has something like 40 minutes worth of voice cutscenes and dialogue, so you'd be surprised how much there is to experience.
Just get the Dark Souls and stop screwing around.
Ooh, that told me.
Get the hell out of here, Mike. We ain't got much time left.
More than that, you've got classic video game holdovers in the form of unlockable cheat codes that let you do goofy stuff like light yourself on fire, play as a dog, or run around blasting disco music. That's what I'm fucking talking about, man. That's video games. When is the last time you played a game with big head mode, huh? It's probably been a while, hasn't it? These are the kinds of purely fun traits that I really miss in games, and if this was a pure horror experience, the juxtaposition of a disco dog man with a fat head running around through hell would probably take away from the experience, but because it's more of an action-adventure game, those contrasting tones really lend themselves to a fuller experience. Michael himself has some of the best one-liners in the game, and between him and Jaunty, I was cracking up while playing.
Hey, anything's possible, Doc. You, above all people, should know that. I'm sorry. Did I call you people?
It might seem like I'm dwelling on this a lot, but let me give you the greater argument here. I touched on it earlier, but I think modern horror games can feel painfully one note, and I think it's to their detriment a lot of times. But the reason they do it is because it's easy. It's easier to just overload the player with horror themes and hope that they don't become desensitized. Shadowman, by contrast, is one of those rare games that knows how to juggle the action and the horror elements together while making the player laugh, and still taking itself seriously enough to pull off a few genuine scares along the way, and that's not easy to do. Or to put it even simpler, the tone that Shadowman has is a lot harder to pull off than people realize, and the fact that they did it so well is something worth noting. Not only that, but it does all that while having a really unique setup as well. It's not just hell after all, it's a unique world steeped in voodoo mysticism. A criminally underutilized setting, I might add. And through clever use of the asylum, they're able to give you a variety of areas of industrial horror that go so over the top, there's just nothing really quite like it. It's fantastic. But you get my point. We haven't even gotten to the gameplay yet, and Shadowman has already accomplished the extremely difficult task of tone and good world building more so than most games I've ever played. But if this video has a running theme, it will be just how many layers of worthwhile content the game has, because the gameplay is actually what blew me away more than anything. Now, I'm going to say up front, the combat can feel a little dated, and we'll be fair there. It's been spruced up by Nightdive Studio so that it handles really well, and personally I had some fun with it. I noticed that the voodoo items were a bit more useful in combat than they used to be, but it's still very much a product of its time. There's a soft auto-aim feature, and frankly most of the enemies have way too much health and wind up just being really tedious to kill. It's serviceable, and ultimately it doesn't really take away from the rest of the game. Compared to a lot of shooters of the era, I'd say that Shadowman has aged better than most, even without the remaster, so try to take the game in its proper context. Thankfully for Shadowman, the real core of the gameplay isn't its combat, even if it might seem that way at first. Really, it's an incredibly well-made Metroidvania, and it has some of the best level design I've ever seen in a game. In a world of linear level designs and quest markers that treat you like a 5-year-old, stepping into Shadowman was a completely different experience. Just look at the layouts of some of these levels, the sheer variety of paths, the number of corridors, the verticality of the structures. Every single level is designed to be traversed in a multitude of different ways and at different times. They're designed to have layers and layers of depth to them, so that every time you unlock some new power or immunity, you can go to a level you've been to before and experience an entirely different path with its own new things to discover. It might even sound tedious to have to backtrack through areas several times, but it's actually handled incredibly well. Firstly, you have access to fast travel through Luke's teddy bear, provided you've made it to certain checkpoints. so you never have to walk from one end of the earth to the other. And within each level, as you progress and explore, you'll find new shortcuts that bring you to different areas inside a level and even beyond. So uncovering the world feels fun and rewarding rather than repetitive or tedious. You'll rarely ever run through a certain area the same way twice. And because the level design is so thoughtful, it succeeds in making all that backtracking feel like an adventure with new secrets and unlockables behind every corner rather than a cheap attempt at padding out the game's length. For example, in areas where you have platforming segments but also a floor of lava, enemies are placed in such a way as to have a line of sight on you no matter what route you take. Enemy placement is meaningful, it's intentional, and changes throughout the game as well. And when it comes to the backtracking, if you unlock some new power and follow up a lead you had in the beginning of the game, very rarely will you be rewarded for your efforts with just a few Cadeaux or a Dark Soul. In the majority of cases, you wind up uncovering some huge, previously unexplored area of a level or some incredibly useful shortcut. The stages themselves are also cleverly designed to hint at areas that you can access later as well. Chances are, once you discover a new area, you've kind of seen it before. Whether that's through a window or a set of iron bars, I'd often follow some crazy rabbit hole and pop out on the other end in a room that I saw in the beginning of the game and go, oh, so that's how you get here. You even get a decent idea of the level's layout from the opening monologue for each level, and which, let me just say, it's one of my favorite things about this game. Check it out.
What further horrors shall I find within this terrible place, where in a time before these catastrophic events, I would have willingly accepted pallid imitations of such horrors. I now have come so far, my sensibilities lie benumbed by all I see. I do not embrace this horror, but rather stand immobile beneath its self-indulgent gaze. Confusion reigns, and I fear the God within the machine is no longer there.
It's so campy, I love it. It goes so well with the rest of the game. Shadowman is a failed English major according to the lore here, so it actually does make sense that he would wax on poetically like this. And frankly, I think it adds a lot of charm. You'll still get lost very frequently, and don't get me wrong, this can be a very frustrating game to play. I spent many hours just running around lost, not quite sure where to go. And the two NPCs that are supposed to help you through this, more often than not, just make you feel foolish for asking.
Any idea where they might be?
What am I, a Dark Soul travel guide now?
But when you do eventually poke through that membrane and find some new path, or remember that one spot you meant to revisit, it's always intensely rewarding, and that's what I'm stressing here. Many games, even recent ones, try to entice you into exploration in ways that feel artificial. But because the game doesn't respect you as a player and ultimately the game's designs are usually very basic, it winds up feeling fake and empty. Shadowman is the kind of game that you'll like being lost in, which is another incredibly rare thing to see in a video game. And just personally, I never really liked collectathons from this era. They felt sort of empty or pointless. I've still got nostalgia for a few of them since I played them as a kid, but even as a kid at the time, I was always thinking, I don't really get the appeal here. To avoid the flame wars in the comments, I won't say what platformers I did or didn't like. I'm just gonna let you stew over it and wonder forever. Shadowman was different though, and I think it's in no small part due to the fact that the two major things that you collect in this game, Dark Souls and Cadeaux, translate into actual power. Dark Souls increase the strength of your shadow gun and give you more energy for your voodoo weapons, while Cadeaux can be traded in for health upgrades. Everything else you find is either a new voodoo weapon, secrets, or some kind of gun that you can use in the live side, meaning that no matter what you do, you'll feel like you're making meaningful progress. The level design, tone of the game world, gameplay, and collectibles are all working together in a way that I don't feel like they do in a lot of other collectathons. The secrets in particular are an excellent exploration wildcard. They're not visible, you unlock them by meeting certain criteria in the game world, and they did a great job at further enhancing the exploration. You'll be scratching your head, trying to figure out where to go in a level or what's left to find, and you might take a leap of faith thinking that you can reach a certain ledge. You can't, so you fall and you die, but because you tried that, and the developers figured you would try that, you unlock a secret for it. It fills in the gaps between progression points so that your exploration always feels rewarding, even if it isn't necessarily directly tied to your actual story progression. I'm going to try not to spoil too many secrets in here, because you're probably going to want to find these for yourself as you play, but seeing the little secret found image show up on screen was like a little dose of how video games used to be, and I loved seeing it. I mentioned earlier that enemy placements can change throughout the game. Let's revisit that point, because this sets up a moment in my playthrough that perfectly illustrates why I felt the need to make a video about this game. Enemies will change a lot as you play. The flying enemies in Deadside start off flying very high above you, out of your attacking range, and they don't attack you. But as you progress, they get lower and lower until they're attacking you as you pass, and later on, even more will spawn. Relatively harmless zombies are replaced with more dangerous ones, and their numbers increase and even sometimes decrease as time goes on. You never really know what to expect, and though we already talked about the backtracking, it goes without saying that this feature goes hand in hand with all of that to keep the game interesting as you play. Now there's an area called the Paths of Shadows in Deadside that kind of operates like a hub world. It gives you relatively easy access to a number of different levels, and it's in a central location for Deadside areas as well. As you go through the game, the number of enemies that spawn right here will fluctuate. It grew a little and then a little bit more, but after I passed a certain power threshold, enemies stopped spawning here altogether. I figured, hey, maybe I've gotten so strong it just stopped throwing fodder at me. Maybe the world will get quieter and quieter as I approach the final boss. But after a little while, Jesus! This happened at like 3 in the morning after I had been ravenously hunting Dark Souls throughout the night, so I absolutely jumped a bit. The game lured me into a false sense of security by leaving this area empty for a while before dropping a ton of enemies on my head at the end. Which, that by itself is really clever. I love it when games toy with your sense of security. It's something that games should really do a lot more of. But then the second layer of this comes into play. There was an area I needed to spend some time in Deadside, and some areas that I could now explore with my shadow powers that I couldn't before. And I obviously didn't want to have to fight through an army of these zombies every time I warped in. But because all of these areas are connected, I remembered that the Temple of Life nearby has a river of lava running through it that I could now run over that connects to the wastelands. So for a lot of the backtracking in this area, I instead used that waypoint, hopped into the lava tunnel, and circled around through to the wastelands instead, which saved me time and helped me avoid the mob of enemies. And that's what I'm talking about.
Layers!
This game has so many layers of great game design. It gives you a bunch of options, a bunch of shortcuts that you might not ever even use, and then creates situations where you might use them, while also being totally okay with you not using some if you decided to explore the game in some different way. All those factors make the game feel real, tangible, non-linear, giving you a genuine experience. And the phrase genuine experience sounds a little bit ridiculous, so at the risk of being redundant, let me just explain what I mean. Because it's not as though this little shortcut by itself is mind-blowing or anything. Plenty of games have shortcuts, plenty of games have moving enemies, and plenty of games have good level design, frankly. But situations like this are little I was here moments where, because of the order I personally went through the game, I was able to take all the knowledge that I had of the game world and then use it in a way that the next player might not, and there were plenty of moments like this. When game developers respect you as a player enough to give you options without shoving those options in your face, it makes the whole game feel 10 times better. And furthermore, accomplishing that sensation of freedom, however limited, in a single player game that has static objectives and a single coherent game world is super impressive. Especially since this game didn't have 20 years of 3D Metroidvanias to learn from. And it doesn't just stop at the complexity either. As you move through the game, gradually you're expected to kill the 5 serial killers mentioned in the opening cutscenes. The thing is, you can't actually kill them until you've unlocked the ability to use your shadow powers in Liveside, since that's where they're all hiding. But the game doesn't stop you from visiting their lairs without those powers. You're perfectly welcome to walk right into a death trap and fight bosses you genuinely can't kill because, again, at the risk of being redundant, the developers respected you enough as a player to let you make mistakes and give you options. You can't have a successful semi-open world like this without allowing for and taking into account these mistakes, which they clearly did. You even get a special cutscene if you go talk to Nettie after going into one of these levels without your powers. From top to bottom, this game was put together incredibly well. Additionally, you've got an optional Easter egg hunt to collect Luke's teddy bears all over the game world, and these ones are a little bit too cryptic even for me. I'm going to spoil one location here now, so avert your gaze if you plan to get them yourself, but some of them are even located outside of the boundaries of the game world. It's a game that just keeps on giving. It expects you to think outside the box and 100% rewards you for doing so. Whether that's in my simple example of the shortcut, or more esoteric rewards like the elusive teddy bears tucked in the most impossible of places. And just before we return to talking about the game's story, let's just take a second to talk about the soundtrack, because without it, I don't think this game would have hit nearly as hard. The composer, Tim Haywood, did an amazing job with the original soundtrack, and now that it's been remastered, it sounds even better, with some of my favorite tracks being completely new pieces that play in some of the new levels added in the remaster. The music selection is always appropriate, and the tempos of the Loa, some of the more confusing areas in the game, I'd compare them to the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time, but on steroids while being contained in a game that itself is one gigantic water temple on steroids. So you're guaranteed to be lost at least a little bit, but the soundtrack has a solid beat while still keeping that mysterious voodoo feeling, which really helps to reduce the frustration in those key areas. Places that are meant to feel strange or mysterious have bizarre and haunting melodies that always seem to work perfectly, and for your more horror-themed areas like the Asylum, Tim Haywood goes all out and throws some of the most experimental approaches to horror music I've seen in a video game. Here's a quick sample of what you got. Now keep in mind, I played the old school versions of those in the hopes of avoiding a copyright strike, because God knows I don't need one of those, but the remake's audio tracks are fully updated to sound crisp and clear. If you've ever wanted a horror soundtrack that includes power drills, chainsaws, squealing pigs, wet meat, and crying children, don't look any further, Shadowman's got it all, snugly placed right next to some really jammin' tracks. Believe me when I say that if a particular area in the game is going for very specific feeling, the soundtrack does a lot of the heavy lifting to make it a success. I first played this game on the N64, if you can believe it, when I was probably way too young for it, but even after all these years, I still get the main theme stuck in my head from time to time. Let's get back to the game proper. As you go throughout the game world, following the footsteps of your predecessor, unlocking new pathways and collecting Dark Souls, which was a nice touch, by the way. I like that they tried to justify the idea of power gating certain levels behind Dark Soul levels. A lot of games just sort of leave it up to game logic, like you can't open this door because you don't have enough stars or whatever in Super Mario 64. So I appreciate that they took the time to make it make sense within the game world. It doesn't make a huge difference, but I appreciate it. But as you move through, the tension mounts. You see in the Asylum's facilities that they've managed to not only find Govi that contain Dark Souls, but later areas show that they've been able to extract them somehow. Enemies get tougher and you'll start to fight more and more of these true forms, the undead immortal warriors containing the Dark Souls inside. Everything you do follows the prophecy to a T, which doesn't bode well for you considering how it's supposed to end. I like that though. For a game with so much dialogue and cutscenes, there's also a lot of visual storytelling here as well. Imagine showing the audience what's going on instead of just telling them. Every horror game these days just leaves lazy notes everywhere, which is the laziest form of storytelling. It's dumb, it just doesn't make any sense.
He must have died while carving it.
Oh, come on.
Well, that's what it says.
Look, if he was dying, he wouldn't bother to carve arg. He'd just say it.
So it's nice to see in detail all the true forms splayed out, being built, being experimented on, and the storage facilities where they're all kept where they're finished. Further along, you're given another goal, something more personal to Michael. He finds his brother, who he believed to be alive and deadside this whole time.
Luke!
You gotta help me, Mikey! They're gonna hurt me!
It's okay, Luke. I'm here now. Stay there. I'm coming to get you.
I'm real scared, Mikey! You gotta help me! Please!
Luke! Come back! Luke!
Right at the heart of the dark machine, and the only way to reach him is to shut it down. But reaching the pumps that power those pistons involves going to live side, killing the serial killers, and shutting down each piston individually. So if you needed any other reason to continue doing what you were doing anyways, this is it. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I am 100% that white dude in the horror movies that hears something in the woods and has to go investigate. It's just one of those things, like how could you rest easy without knowing for sure, right? And the idea that somebody that you care about is trapped in hell and you could potentially save them is a powerful motivator for me, even if it is highly suspicious. So at this point, you really start to really feel for Michael. He's already in this against his will, essentially, but things just seem to get worse and worse. Chasing after those serial killers is tougher than first expected, though. It's hinted in the drawings in various levels of the game, but they're using 5 ritually slaughtered corpses to open a door between dead side and live side. And to chase them, you'll have to find extractors hidden in cathedral-like areas throughout the game, which rip open the chests of the bodies and allow you to travel through to their hideouts. Once you have the extractors though, you're allowed to pick and choose which serial killers you fight in any order and at any time during your playthrough. You don't find all the extractors at once, so you can sprinkle these boss fights in your game however you like. I would recommend killing Jack first though. That notebook that he's writing in the opening cutscene has the codes necessary for disabling the various pistons in the engine room. It's not a big deal, but if you don't kill him first, you're gonna have to figure out the combinations through trial and error or run all the way back later. It's a little annoying on your first playthrough. It's not enough for me to take off any points, but just keep that in mind if you do play the game. Jack is allegedly the leader of the 5, so I left him till the end, which was a bit of a mistake. Other than that hiccup, these levels were some of my favorites. They're huge, and a few of them are new. The Video Nasty Killer and Marco Cruz didn't have any levels in the original release at all, and their new additions are thematically appropriate, complete with their own fights and atmosphere. They feel like they fit in with the game perfectly. Given what we went over when we talked about level design, hopefully by now you guys appreciate what a huge task that just, quote, adding a few levels, quote, can be. All of the new levels that they've added are huge, well made, and they feel like they belong on the game world, so if you needed another reason to buy the remaster, here it is. But the real reason I love these levels so much is because of how quiet they are. There's not a lot of enemies in these areas, with a few exceptions, so these levels really just build up tension as you go through them. Think of that feeling you get before opening a boss room in Zelda, or opening a fog door in Dark Souls, which is the only Dark Souls reference I'll make in this video, but stretched out over the entire level. I was amazed how even after spending many hours wading through literal oceans of blood, piles of bodies, and fighting off demonic true forms, The creepiest moments were just walking through the trails of bodies left in Liveside by these killers. Eerie, empty theater complexes, abandoned apartments, the London Underground. You really get to walk through the killer's shoes and see their victims. It's an expert tonal shift compared to the rest of the game. Some of the best visuals and horror elements are found in these levels, and I really appreciate when a game knows to take its time and to just build some atmosphere. The atmosphere is boosted quite a bit by the end of the game as well, because you'll be using a blade called l'Eclipser to cause a solar eclipse in the world, granting you the shadow powers that you can use in Liveside and putting Nettie, one of your few lifelines in the game, into a permanent sleep. So you've got fewer people to rely on, no sun, and a lot of creepy level designs. It's awesome. Really, my only complaint about these levels are the boss fights themselves, which are...
The end is nigh, and it's sooner than you think.
They exist. That's about all I can say. If you've managed to unlock the Violator weapon, most of these bosses are going to be painfully easy to beat. Jack the Ripper is the one exception, and his fight is also the best of the 5, because as soon as that fight starts, the Madman jumps to the ceiling and crawls around up there to get behind you. This fight used to be really annoying due to the clunky controls of the older versions of this game, but it feels great in the remaster. I only wish that he was made a bit more dangerous so the fight would last a bit longer. Having him crawling around on the ceiling throughout the arena was great. I love his body language in the cutscene too. In the beginning of the game he's timid and unsure of himself, but by the end he seems really relaxed and in control. Like he's become privy to some dark secret, which of course he has, it's the little things. Once you're at the end game though, and you've done it all, you've killed the 5 serial killers, you've completed all the trials of the Gad, you've gathered up enough Dark Souls and collected enough voodoo weapons to proceed, you return to the engine room where Luke was trapped.
Luke!
It's bad, Mikey. Real bad. They're gonna kill me if they catch me.
Luke, don't move. Stay there. I'm coming to get you. Jesus, Luke! No!
A final chat with Luke before you chase him into the final area of the game, passing by hundreds of true forms caged up in walls and walls, ready for the invasion.
Luke, there you are. What you doing running away like that? Luke, speak to me, kid.
Hiya, Mikey. Glad you could make it. I've been waiting for you. I've been scared they were gonna catch me. That you weren't gonna come get me.
Here, Luke. You should have known I'd always be there for you, bro.
There were bad things in the dark. Badder than the boogeyman. They did stuff to me. Stuff I don't want to think about.
Oh, God. I'm sorry, Luke.
Hey, you want to hear a joke, Mikey?
Sure.
Once upon a time, there was a murderer and his victim walking hand in hand towards some deep, dark woods. The victim squeezes the murderer's hand real tight and says, looking up pleadingly with big brown eyes, "I'm real scared, mister, of the deep, dark woods."
Luke, what the hell?
He sighs and he says, "You're scared? How the hell do you think I feel? I'm gonna be walking back through them on my own."
Well, obviously, we knew that's not Luke. If you read the prophecy, you saw this coming because it's very clearly showing you gathering up all the Dark Souls so that Legion can kill you and take them all with no effort.
You created the prophecy?
Of course I did, you pillock.
But it's still a pretty awesome scene, and thankfully Legion is a great boss fight. It starts with a fake out where he pretends to fight you and then dies easily, but then he quickly morphs into an Eldritch Horror that flies around the arena while you fight him in a classic platformer boss style. I actually died the first time I fought him, and I got a bad ending cutscene where Legion straps you to a chair, takes your Dark Souls, and goes on to invade the world.
With a whimper. Goodbye.
That's charm, that's soul. Why don't games do this anymore? So I backtracked a little bit and I unlocked a second Violator weapon that I forgot about. They really don't make them like they used to, boys. And my second attempt went a lot smoother. An excellent ending to an excellent game. When it's all said and done and that final cutscene is playing, it all comes together one last time. I was really sad to see that the game was over because I had an absolute blast playing this game from start to finish. It's such a full and complete experience.
My God, the lad's got him bloody done it! Looks like you owe me that drink, Michael.
It is a niche game though. Everything I loved about it could equally be a reason somebody else hated it. It's confusing, the horror can be overbearing, the secrets are obscure, and the backtracking does take time. But if you're the type of person who likes Metroidvanias and this is your kind of game, consider picking up Shadowman Remastered on Steam. You might wind up loving it as much as I did. I love this, dude. There's this website online, Common Sense Media. They do like reviews for parents for games. It got docked some points for liberal use of the S word. It even censors it on their website. Okay, so you're surrounded by dead bodies, but does that mean you have to swear so much? Jiminy crickets.
Shit. The asshole of the universe. Damn. The power of the Dark Souls. I embrace it. Shit, that's hot.